Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto was adopted by Guy and fell in love with Kurenai Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Later the night before the attack was expected, while Naruto was keeping watch, he thought back to the growl he had heard when Sasuke's eyes awoke. The Kyuubi has been satisfied ignoring everything that happens around me so far. Why would the Sharingan bother it so much? I mean, the only Uchiha ever able to control it was Madara, and I doubt that either Sasuke or even Itachi will ever have the strength and prowess he did. A louder growl than after the fight began to build, wrenching Naruto's attention away from his own thoughts. He sighed and made another watch clone, before closing his eyes and focusing on the demon within him. When he opened his eyes, he was in his mindscape, complete with a massive Hokage monument and a brightly glowing sun. Instead of the rest of the village, however, was a giant red cage with a rage-filled demon inhabiting it. Well, Fox, you've been trying to get my attention, what did you want to say? Many would be shocked at his casual disregard for the giant, nearly unstoppable beast in front of him, but he had known for years, and while this was only his second time in here, he already knew the Kyuubi couldn't do anything to him. It isn't wise to act so blaze with me, mortal. I may not be able to affect you right now, but I could always destroy your home after you die. A smirk had developed on the Kyuubi's face, thoughts of freedom and destruction often did that to him. So why does Sasuke's new Sharingan bother you? Only Madara was ever strong enough to control you, and Sasuke is no Madara. The Kyuubi's smirk shrunk into a near grimace at the memory. Being controlled by Madara had led to his current position, and he was not fond of the experience. First, stop bringing up that stain on history. Second, I have decided in my infinite wisdom that Sharingan wielders are untrustworthy thieves. You are stronger than a vast majority of shinobi your age, but you aren't strong enough. Should he betray you, or your life be threatened in the coming battle, I have generously decided that you may use some of my power to make up for your shortcomings. Naruto's jaw dropped in shock. The Kyuubi was being an arrogant ass, but still considerably nicer than he expected. After learning about his status as a Jinchuriki, Naruto read up and learned that most of them use the power of their burden when in combat. He had tried and eventually succeeded in contacting the demon, before being blown off for being too weak to ever use its power. Apparently the training he had been doing was acceptable to the Fox's standards of a strong container. Despite it insulting him anyway. I thought you said I would never be worthy of fighting with your power, and that I was too weak in every way to handle it. A short huff of disdain met Naruto's question, before the Kyuubi spoke once more. You aren't worthy of my power, and it's only thanks to your insane guardian's training that your body will be able to handle my power, as your strength and durability have risen enough to access a cloak made of my chakra, with just one tail. Anymore, and not only will your body be badly burned, your mind will snap and I will take over. Naruto stared at the grinning demon, wondering why it told him it could take control when he used too much. Thank you. I promise I won't use your power unless all other options I have fail. A short bow of gratitude punctuated the statement, before Naruto left his seal. I almost don't hate this one. Of course he looks like his damned many times over, in this case literally, father. There were worse options, at least I wasn't stuck inside an Uchiha. Snort, keep getting stronger mortal, you just might be the one. The grand beast's thoughts strayed to the past once more, this time memories of better days going through its head. Naruto came out of his mindscape just in time to smell breakfast being made, signaling he had spent nearly 4 hours of real time in the trance-like state. He stood and stretched the kinks that had developed in his muscles out, a few satisfying pops coming when he flexed his back. He went inside to see the entire group gathered at the table, worry evident on the genins' faces. Kurenai and Kakashi were both composed, but Naruto could tell that his sensei was worried as well, most likely about his team. Naruto, you know today's plan, right? The blonde looked to Kakashi before nodding, making a group of 10 clones and setting them up around the house. Now that Tazuna's family has their own protection, let's go to the bridge. Zabuza will most likely be there, as will this, Haku, Naruto and Hinata told us of. She is apparently trained medically, so most likely means of attack are Senbons and poisons. Kurenai and I will handle Zabuza, you all will protect Tazuna and distract his accomplice until our fight is finished. A unanimous nod from the genin and breakfast was devoured in silence. The assembled team stood, Tazuna soon after. Hinata stood at Tazuna's back, with Sasuke in front of him. Kiba and Shino flanked him, while Sakura stood to Sasuke's left. Naruto stood at Sasuke's right, the two sensei leading the troop through town. When they reached the bridge, the workers were all sprawled on the ground, most appeared to be unconscious. Tazuna nearly froze in terror, before one of the builders looked up, bleeding and close to unconsciousness. Run, Tazuna. Demon attacked. The heavily injured man collapsed into darkness, unable to maintain awareness any longer. A mist rolled onto the bridge, bringing the group's guard up even higher. Instead of the rough tone that Team 7 expected, having been the only group to face Zabuza already, a bone-chilling laugh resounded through the fog. Hinata, having activated her Byakugan, realized that something had happened. Sensei, there's 3 fighters in the fog, not 2. Kakashi paled slightly. The laughter combined with the fog and Zabuza's known former associates led him to just one conclusion. Naruto, help me with this fog. Kakashi and Naruto went through hand seals mirroring each other, before letting out a twin shout of, Futon, Daitapa. The already forceful attack grew as it was fired in tandem, sending hurricane force winds into the mist. With such power, the swordsmen holding the mist released control of their jutsu, it draining too much chakra fighting the winds. As the bridge cleared, 3 distinct figures were revealed to all the non-Hyuga at the other side. Kakashi and Kurenai turned to one another, their plan not accounting for the extra player. On the nearly complete bridge stood Momochi Zabuza, demon of the hidden mist, his Kubikiribocho at his side. To his right was a shorter, more slender person with dark hair and a hunter nin mask, Zabuza's original accomplice, Haku. On his left, however, stood someone just as intimidating as the eyebrowless warrior. A tall, thin blonde with a mask similar to Haku stood, twirling his long, needle-shaped sword around his fingers. Kuriare Kushimaru, one of the strongest and most ruthless ninja ever produced by Kurigakure. He wielded the Nuibari, a sword that worked as a giant sewing needle. He favored the silent killing technique like Zabuza, but was an expert in kenjutsu even without it. Among his many evil deeds was the murder of his own sensei, and he had left the village even before Zabuza's failed coup. His favorite method of murder was to crucify his victims with the wire attached to his sword. What is this, Zabuza? Willing to align yourself with that psychotic sadist just to better do Gato's bidding? Kakashi's frustration was evident, he didn't even think that Kushimaru was still alive. Hey, I called back up probably the same time you did. If I have to resort to a lunatic like him, consider it your fault for escaping last time. The same high-pitched grating laughter as earlier came once more, it even still echoed around them given all the empty space. My mental state notwithstanding, you should show a little respect to your senpai Zabuza. After all, you did have to get me to bail you out of your trouble here. Irritation briefly flashed in Zabuza's eyes, before he turned his glare back on the Konoha shinobi. Alright, one chance to give up before you're either spit in two or crucified. The killing intent released with the statement left Sasuke's hands shaking and Sakura shivering in dread. See, Kakashi, the boy is still shaking. Even though it couldn't be seen, the smirk could be heard in Zabuza's voice. I'm shaking, in excitement. Sasuke lowered himself into a stance, kunai drawn in his right hand. The shout was taken as the sign to begin. Kakashi squaring off mano a mano with Zabuza, Kiba, Sasuke, and Akamaru against Haku, and Naruto and Kurenai against Kushimaru. Shino, Hinata, and Sakura remaining with Tazuna in case one of their assailants made it past the front line. Kiba activated his Shikyaku no Jutsu, and Sasuke his Sharingan as they closed in on the masked girl. Akamaru, Jujin Bunshin, a puff of smoke surrounding his dog, and now there were two Kibas, both dashing at top speed to take out the fast Kunoichi. Gatsuga. Two whirling dervishes of clawed death spun their way to the enemy, who was forced to jump in effort to dodge, but Sasuke had seen that coming, and made 6 hand seals. Kaden. Gukaku no Jutsu. A gout of flames rushed from Sasuke's mouth to his Kunoichi target, a cloud of smoke appearing when it reached her. When the cloud cleared, however, there was only a mirror of ice where his target had been, reflecting her faceless image back at him. Your eyes and his wild attacks are making this troublesome, forgive me, but now I will go all out as well. Water vapor in the air gathered into a dome around the two hot-headed genin, before the temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Hyoten Haijutsu. Makyu Hyusho. The water vapor that had surrounded Sasuke and Kiba froze into mirrors like the one Haku was hiding in, forming a dome-shaped prison around the two. This is my ultimate, inescapable technique, surrender, before I'm forced to kill you. Kiba and Sasuke exchanged a glance, before nodding and setting themselves up back to back, Akamaru joining and forming a triangle formation. We won't ever surrender to a criminal like you. Sasuke, let's do this. 1 quintillion 111 quadrillion 111 trillion 111 billion 111 million 111,111. The battle between Zabuza and Kakashi raged on another section of the bridge, all of the missing nin's techniques being immediately used against him. Something isn't right. The Sharingan allows him to copy ninjutsu, but he is performing all my techniques in tandem with me. Zabuza struggled against the desire to end this fight fast using his strongest jutsu, and instead moved to close in with his giant blade. Kakashi was glad that he was so practiced in hiding his emotions, otherwise the shock that Zabuza had unconsciously resisted his hypnotic suggestion would likely put him on the chopping block. Seeing the massive sword closing in, Kakashi made a split-second decision to unveil something he had avoided using for years. A smoke cloud shrouded his right hand temporarily, stalling Zabuza. When it dispersed, it revealed a weapon that Kakashi had not been known to carry in the bingo books. A gleaming white tanto that practically glowed with chakra was held in a forward grip, almost proud to be used once more. The white light chakra saber of Hitaki Sakumo, legendary White Fang of Konoha. Desperate enough to beg your father's spirit to help you, Kakashi. In spite of the taunt, Zabuza was wary of the blade. It focused, sharpened, and purified chakra sent into it by the wielder, which gave it the white glow. Even someone a complete amateur with a tanto could use its abilities to fire waves of energy off the blade like a samurai, and Zabuza knew that no matter what anyone said about Kakashi, he was no amateur. Not so much, Zabuza. More like a duel between swordsmen, a true fight to the finish. Kakashi launched a wave of chakra from his sword the moment he finished his statement. It struck the Kubikiribocho hard and with a screeching noise left a gash on the other legendary weapon. Zabuza smirked once more, his wariness overcome by his love of a true clash of blades. Alright Kakashi, let me show you how it's done. 111 sextillion 111 quintillion 111 quadrillion 111 trillion 111 billion 111 million 111,111. Kurenai and Naruto both watched Kushimaru cautiously, knowing this fight would most likely be a stalemate until one of the others finished their battle and came in to assist. Kushimaru, on the other hand, looked rather disinterested with his opponents. That brat Zabuza took the real game and left me with a kid and his FAP material. Next time an old ally asks me for help, I'm going to sew them to my wall. The lean swordsman abruptly dashed at the two, testing to see if he would have any fun this day. Naruto responded with a volley of shuriken, while Kurenai formed a few quick hand seals. Megan, Jubaku Satsu, was whispered by Kurenai, before she vanished. Kushimaru had deflected all the shuriken approaching him already, before he felt his body lock up. A tree seemed to grow from the bridge and surround him, leaving only his neck and head free. Kurenai leaned forward and went to stab him with a kunai, only for Kushimaru to bring up the Nuibari and parry her attack, diving away from her to avoid Naruto's quick attempt at a kick. You really thought a genjutsu would be able to take out someone as experienced as me? I was preparing to break it the moment you vanished. After all, the only person to ever shunshin without evidence was Uchiha Shisui, and he's dead. Kurenai hadn't really expected that to work, but without genjutsu there wasn't much she could do against a high-level opponent. In spite of her skill, she was a rookie Junin, and hadn't trained as extensively in other combat forms. Naruto frowned at their opponent, who was clearly better than them even if he had lost a step or two from age. He formed a hand seal, and glowing lines appeared on his outfit. Kai, the blonde swordsman, looked on in new interest, fuinjutsu being rather rare in his experience. Immediately he was set to the defensive as Naruto moved at speeds more along the lines of a skilled Junin than a genin. Kushimaru used his high flexibility to weave through Naruto's attacks, before sending a thrust kick into Naruto's gut and jumping back to make some distance. Naruto quickly righted himself and set up a stance that the old swordsman found familiar. Hand held palm back in front and the other locked behind the back while the fighter stands straight up. That crazy bastard that used the Hachiman to drive the old group back used that stance. Hey kid, you don't happen to know anyone by the name of Maida, do you? Naruto looked shocked that the enemy would talk with him like this, but decided he might as well answer. My name is Maida Naruto, son of the resplendently youthful green beast of Konoha, Maida Guy. This may just be fun yet, after all the kid is too young for the gates, but he is fast and strong. Kushimaru didn't realize the mistake he had made focusing solely on the child until a field of pure darkness surrounded him, all sensation removed. Damn it, I can't believe I made a rookie mistake like that, but I can still salvage this. He began spinning his sword in front of him to deal with incoming kunai and shuriken, while simultaneously building his chakra to release this genjutsu. Kurenai was breathing heavily, the Kokuangyo no Jutsu being far more chakra intensive and less subtle than most genjutsu in Konoha's archives. It was also, fortunately, much harder to dispel, and removed all 5 senses, rather than just sight as one would expect. Now Naruto, even he won't be able to dispel it too quickly. Naruto dashed to get behind the swordsman, his front inaccessible due to the spinning blade. Black cloth fell from under his sleeves, preparing the technique he was sure would win the fight. 111 septillion, 111 sextillion, 111 quintillion, 111 quadrillion, 111 trillion, 111 billion, 111 million, 111,111. Sasuke and Kiba were barely able to keep from being put down by the skilled kunoichi they fought. Kiba's and Akamaru's high speed and increased senses allowed them to react fast enough to typically avoid most needles, though Akamaru was running low on chakra. Sasuke was using his Sharingan, which had gained a second tomo from the struggle, to deflect the Senbon with a kunai. Hey Mutt, I think I know what to do. Kiba had heard Sasuke's whispered voice, understanding that a plan had finally been made. He nodded when Sasuke explained what to do. Even though he found it distasteful, it was something a smart ninja would do. Stop. We surrender already. The reverse from the earlier position of never giving up surprised Haku, but as she couldn't hear what Sasuke was saying nor had she seen him speak, she accepted their surrender. You should have done so far earlier, but I will grace you with your lives. Haku wasn't fool enough to leave her mirrors, but she did do exactly what Sasuke was hoping for, and look him in the eye. In spite of not possessing his Sharingan long, Sasuke had read about every technique it was capable of, and hoped his plan would succeed based on his earlier test with Kiba during training. Haku was exhausted from keeping her dome up so long, and needed to get some rest or take a food pill. Her eyes shut moments after looking the Uchiha in the eye, never noticing that his two Tomo were spinning slowly counterclockwise. The mirror dome shattered as its creator drifted into sleep, Sasuke following after from chakra exhaustion. Kiba made sure to tie up their foe before bringing Sasuke and their captive back to the remainder of their team. 1 septillion 111 sextillion 111 quintillion 111 quadrillion 111 trillion 111 billion 111 million 111,111. The ringing sound made by the clashing of Zabuza and Kakashi's blades continued unabated for the whole time Haku had her mirrors out. Kakashi didn't have the stamina that Zabuza did, but he had a far lighter weapon and his Sharingan didn't take much chakra when he wasn't using its abilities. A quick duck and another shallow cut appeared on Zabuza, who seemed to be channeling some sort of Berserker Gang abilities and shrugged off the slew of cuts on his body, as well as the scratches adorning his sword. A backflip to gain distance and Kakashi fired another energy wave at the monster he was fighting. It was avoided with a spin to the right. Kakashi had been injured just as Zabuza had, a large cut across his torso that his flak jacket had kept from being too severe, and he had switched hands after 3 of his fingers broke in his right hand from Zabuza's heavy strikes. In terms of pure Kenjutsu talent, Kakashi was not as good as Zabuza, but he already had a plan to win this fight. All he needed was a distraction to implement it. He weaved sideways and cut a foot off the end of Zabuza's sword by running Raiden chakra through his dad's old weapon. A sound caught the attention of Zabuza's ears and he turned his head slightly to see out of the corner of his eye what had happened. Kakashi jumped at the chance he'd been given to finally end this match of blades. He sheathed his tanto in a scabbard that had appeared on his back when he unsealed it, and used the only quick kill technique he had that didn't need hand seals to accomplish. Zabuza heard an odd sound akin to a heavy pulse mixed with high winds, and turned his head back from the ruins of Haku's jutsu just in time to see the Yondaime Hokage's famous Rasengan gunning right into his ribs. He felt a terrible pain, like his flesh being ground up, hammered, and soaked in acid simultaneously, before he lost his grip on his blade and was thrown back by the force of a small explosion. He barely made it back up to his feet and all of his ribs were most likely broken from the attack he had suffered, leaving him at his opponent's mercy. 11 septillion 111 sextillion 111 quintillion 111 quadrillion 111 trillion 111 billion 111 million 111,111. Naruto let out a shout that would most likely be the last thing Kushimaru ever heard. Kaiman. Kai. Omid Renge. Just as Kushimaru broke the genjutsu he'd been in, he felt a devastating kick launch him into the air. The young boy that had distracted him for the woman's genjutsu wrapped him in cloth, holding it tightly enough that without his sword, which had been dropped when he'd been kicked, there was no way for him to escape. He felt himself start spinning rapidly as the high point of the arc he was in was reached. He felt his momentum shift so that his head was pointed at the ground. Naruto held on as tight as he could, not letting what he knew would happen from this technique dissuade him. The centrifugal force of the spin worked to disorient the target and to increase acceleration during the fall by drilling through the air. With as hard as he had kicked him and considering how high they were and the fact they were falling towards concrete, Kushimaru would die and Naruto himself would be in no position to move much. Naruto was surprised when he heard Kushimaru laughing one last time, and even more so that he was able to talk during this fall. "I'll see you burn in hell with me, Gaki." Naruto then heard a sizzling noise coming from Kushimaru, one he recognized from his training. "He's covered in paper bombs. Damn it, I haven't made Hokage yet, I don't want to die." Naruto knew there was little chance of him escaping from the explosion soon to happen, and only hoped that none of his fellow shinobi were in the blast range. The two blondes struck the ground with a sickening crunch, the elder shinobi's neck breaking instantly. Naruto was in a great deal of pain from the fall, but he managed to roll away from his foe's corpse shortly before the tags detonated. A bright flash and a wave of heat that seared his back coming from the crater he had just escaped. Naruto was thrown to the ground barely maintaining consciousness, the majority of the team exhausted and badly wounded from their battle. Some, like Kurenai and Sasuke, had little in physical damage but were suffering from chakra exhaustion. Kakashi and Kiba were both out of chakra and badly injured. He still had some chakra left, but he couldn't even stand up on his own anymore. The last thing Naruto heard before blacking out was staccato clapping and a low growl. All the still conscious shinobi turned to the edge of the bridge, where Gato stood behind an army of bandit thugs. Hey, looks like the baby demon, his ice princess, and the scarecrow geezer couldn't hack it, right boys? A resounding laugh from the mercenaries brought Kakashi's spirits down. As tired and hurt as they were, even pathetic untrained rabble like this was too much for them. What the fuck, you leprechaun bastard? How Zabuza managed that shout with the level of damage he had suffered was a mystery, but it still earned a response. I was never going to pay you, and the way things happened is better than I hoped. Now you're all so weak you won't even be able to fight back while they kill you all. I think I'll take the girls though. Good-looking young women can be quite the commodity. The woman I think I'll just keep. Shivers of fear and disgust ran down the women's spines, knowing exactly what scum like him would do. Zabuza just dashed straight through the thugs with a wordless snarl, a menacing aura around him and a grinning demon looking over his shoulder. The thugs stabbed him repeatedly as he ran through them, lashing out bare-handed against their ranks, smashing them with enough force to nearly liquefy their internal organs. He caught Gato as he turned and tried to run away, strangling the life out of the little pawns with a wide grin showing his sharpened teeth, his bandages having been torn by a sword blow that exposed the inside of one of his cheeks. Zabuza tossed the body of the now deceased crime lord to the side, before turning back to the thugs. He took 2 steps closer to the group before he fell over dead, the internal bleeding finally bringing the fighter down. Hey, these guys killed our meal ticket, let's go take what he owes us from the town. One of the thugs said, before all of them stopped once again from fear. Naruto had somehow stood back up, a malicious red aura shaped like a fox with one tail covering his body. He just glared at the thugs, before forming 3 hand seals he called out in a grisly voice. Tatsu, Ushi, Tori. Sweden. Suiryu no Mugen no Mai. The thugs stared in horror as all of the water left behind by the mirrors coalesced into a single giant figure. The massive water dragon glared at the thugs with glowing red eyes, before roaring and flying at the group. It struck them 3 ranks in and killed all those in the immediate area. The mercenaries weren't out of hot water yet though, as the water quickly reformed and slammed itself into their group repeatedly. They broke ranks and fled, but none of them escaped. The dragon finally dissipated when no hostile targets remained, along with the cloak of red energy around Naruto. The entirety of Wave's citizenry watched in awe as they had gathered after Tsunami and Inari had been saved, Inari gathering them all himself. Naruto collapsed unconscious after his technique and cloak faded, Kurenai gathering him up and walking back to Tezuna's home with the rest of the group, all of them too tired to converse on the way back. Kakashi looked at Naruto worriedly every once in a while, fearing that his seal had destabilized. The rest of the genin that were conscious looked shocked by the carnage they had seen on the bridge, unable to grasp what their classmate had done. Later on that night, after she had recovered, Kurenai went back to the bridge and took the Nuibari, remembering that Naruto had once mentioned wanting a sword to increase his skill set. No one knew for sure how Naruto would answer the questions the next day was doubtless to bring, all they could do was hope it was still Naruto they would be talking to tomorrow. Naruto sat straight up the moment he awoke. At first he was confused about what had happened and how he had got into a bed, but then he remembered the rage he had felt as he drifted in between being conscious and unconscious. He remembered Gato shouting about letting the girls live, but taking Kurenai to be his personal toy. He remembered the feeling of Zabuza's power as the juggernaut of a man had launched himself at Gato, and killed him. Naruto remembered how he had drawn the Kyuubi's power to keep himself conscious, but the power boost had been enough to use the Suiryu no Mugen no Mai dance of the infinite water dragon. That brought to mind how he had killed every last one of the thugs still standing, crushing and drowning the hundreds of bandit mercenaries that Gato had brought. He shivered. He knew that as a shinobi he would have to kill at one point, but he hadn't expected his first time killing to be a massacre. Thankfully, the mix of the Kyuubi's volatile chakra, which numbed all emotions but rage, and the advice his father had given him and Lee about killing and how a person was only bad or evil if they enjoyed it, had kept him from freezing up during the combat. Naruto's thoughts were interrupted as a soft voice called to him from the doorway. Naruto, I'm glad to see you're awake. Are you, alright? Naruto looked at his sensei and smiled. Kurenai's regularly immaculate appearance was frizzled, her hair not exactly where she liked it and bags under her eyes. The effect was humanizing in a way. His sensei had somehow kept up her looks even during battle, but the genuine concern in her tone kept Naruto from musing for too long. I'm alright, Kurenai sensei. How about you? I've never seen you so disheveled before. Kurenai let out a light sigh as her worries about her closest student were put to rest. She loved Hinata like a little sister, but Naruto was who she spent the most time, and he had grown very close to her during their one-on-one training he requested every day they met. A lot better now that you're awake. I've been watching you the vast majority of the time, trying to keep you comfortable. I only left to grab some food a minute ago. Of course, you would choose to wake up when I'm not in the room. Naruto felt his cheeks lightly flush at the idea that Kurenai had stayed up so long to make sure he was alright while he was unconscious, but thankfully the lights were off in the room and she didn't see. Thanks, sensei. How long was I out? Kurenai looked almost disappointed that he didn't respond to her remark at the end, but answered him anyway. You've been out for 2 days, you were already exhausted and injured before the Kyuubi manifested, and that seemed to weaken you further the moment it shut off. Naruto winced remembering the Kyuubi cloak he had accessed on the bridge. He hadn't told his teammates he could activate that power thanks to earning some small measure of respect from the beast through his intense training. Yeah, I was gonna tell you I could do that, but we didn't really have any time alone before the fight, and I hadn't been planning on using it. I guess I'll have to tell everyone about it now though. Kurenai was upset that he hadn't trusted his teammates enough to tell them without them seeing, but she knew how the villagers had mistreated him before Guy had adopted him, and how they ignored him completely afterward. She even knew that he had to use a henge to shop, because the people that ran the store would ignore him and ask for the next in line while he was standing waiting to pay. Yes, Naruto, you are going to tell them. You should have already told them, they are your teammates and friends, they have a right to know. Naruto looked away while his sensei scolded him, too ashamed to meet her gaze. He knew he should have told them, after all he had told Shikamaru, but he was afraid that they would no longer accept him if they knew. I'm not angry, Naruto. I just want you to trust them as much as you trust me. It's important to trust your comrades. I know you work well together, but lingering doubts can affect your teamwork, and I don't want you to get hurt. What? She means all of us, right? Naruto's blush was now bright enough to be seen, and Kurenai had moved closer to him rather than keep speaking by the doorway. She had apparently not noticed her little slip of the tongue, but became worried when she saw him flush. Is he doing that because of me? No, he can't be. Must just feel feverish or too warm from all the blankets. I'm his sensei and almost a decade older than him, he can't like me. Kurenai had taken to usually calling him Naruto-kun, but on missions she was all business from the second they met their contact. She knew they were a little closer than average for a Junin sensei and genin, but she saw how Guy's relationship as a father figure for Lee had helped the academy dead last grow. She didn't think there was anything wrong or untoward for the way she felt about the genin. Sure, he looked really cute to her sometimes, but she thought it was like he was a puppy, not weird at all. Kurenai's best friend Anko teased her about it all the time though, at least since she had drank a little and told her. Her crazy friend had done just as expected, and accused her of being a cradle robber. Anko had even come up with the theory that the real reason Kurenai had never gone on a date was that everyone that asked had been too old for her, and that she decided to be a Junin sensei as something like a dating service. Kurenai stayed calm and denied these obviously false allegations, even if they had been incredibly embarrassing. Sensei. Kurenai looked back at Naruto, realizing she had space out while remembering Anko's crazy insinuations about just what she taught Naruto when they practiced genjutsu alone in her house. Yes, Naruto. Naruto looked around the room, before continuing. I was wondering what happened to the Nuibari. I wanted to keep it and learn to use it to balance out my combat and not be disadvantaged by longer reaching opponents or swordsmen. Kurenai smiled, glad she remembered correctly about Naruto saying he wanted a sword, but thought to tease him a little before giving it to him. Their mission was more or less complete, after all, and it had been too long since they had spoken about anything normal. Oh, are you sure you wouldn't rather have the Kubikiribocho? It is way bigger and more easily recognized. Her banter left Naruto frowning, however. He had killed Kushimaru and if he wanted his sword he deserved it. That was how that psycho had gained it in the first place. Kubikiribocho belongs to whoever killed Zabuza, which I'm going to say is a mixture of Kakashi-sensei and Zabuza overstraining his own body. Besides, Zabuza earned my respect when he charged Gato and rampaged through his thugs. Kushimaru was nothing but a sadist that was too faded from his prime and too proud to quit. Kurenai saw that her banter attempt failed a second time, Naruto not being recovered enough to respond wittily. Well, I did recover Nuibari from the battlefield for you, but did you have any plans to learn to use it? Naruto nodded his head. He had several ideas, but none of them were likely. I was going to ask Kakashi-sensei if he could give me some tips or scrolls on sword combat, then attempt to mix his insight and my memories to replicate Kushimaru's sword style. Kurenai frowned. She knew it would take personal instruction to really become any good with a sword, and she had a better idea of who to ask. You know, I have a friend in Anbu that specializes in kenjutsu. I bet I could get you a few lessons with her. If you'd like me to, Naruto-kun. Naruto smiled as the friendly honorific resurfaced, and nodded excitedly. He would never pass up training from an Anbu operative if they were willing. It would take time out from the rest of his training, but he could still just make clones for most of it. He could even send a clone to continue his genjutsu training with Kurenai, if she didn't take offense to not training him in person. Their conversation was broken by Kakashi turning on the light in the room they were in, his visible eye closed in what might be his largest eye smile ever. Naruto found the act rather disturbing, however, as he didn't understand how a person could bend their eyelids into a U shape. Maybe Kakashi had to train his eye muscles to do that, or it was some kind of genetic mutation. The laid-back voice that came from behind the mask brought Naruto from his musings, for now. Good to see such a close relationship between sensei and student. Also, welcome back to the land of the living, Naruto. Naruto managed a short nod despite his blush and the unnerved feeling he got watching Kakashi smile. Kurenai didn't blush at all and assumed Kakashi was praising her teaching rather than accusing her of pedophilia. Although she found it odd he referred to it as seeing, despite his eyes currently being closed. Everyone is having dinner right now. I'm sure they would love it if you came down and told them exactly what happened. Kakashi's smile had left him, his eye now open and peering at Naruto suspiciously. He knew his sensei was extremely skilled, and that this was his son, but he was worried the Kyuubi had tried to escape the other day and that Naruto might be suffering from a weakened seal. Naruto scratched the back of his head nervously, before he nodded and agreed to come downstairs. Of course, he had just woke up after 2 days of rest and a heavy injury, so Kurenai insisted that she help him with the stairs, even as Naruto protested that he was fine. When they reached the dining room, the rest of the group turned and saw Naruto. Hinata and Shino had relieved looks, while Kiba, Sasuke, and Sakura looked as though they were trying to figure him out. Naruto sat down in one of the chairs with Kurenai's assistance, before once more scratching his head nervously. So, I guess you guys wanna know what happened at the bridge? Team 7 collectively nodded, while his own team just looked at him in anticipation. Alright, what do you guys know about the Kyuubi attack? Sakura answered instantly. She had tried to memorize every important historical event in Leaf history, though there were some that were no longer taught. On October 10, nearly 13 years ago, the Kyuubi no Kitsune attacked our village. It dealt major damage before the Yondaime killed it, sacrificing himself in the process. Naruto nodded, and proceeded to take a few calming breaths. That is what the books say, and it is mostly correct, with one exception. The group leaned forward, wanting to know what this had to do with Naruto. Killing a Biju only disperses it for a short time, a few years at most. In order to truly save the village, the Yondaime sealed the Kyuubi away into a newborn baby, the only way the container's chakra coils could handle the massive expansion brought by becoming a Jinchuriki. Sasuke's eyes widened, realizing where this was going and envying Naruto for his gift. The baby used was born that day, namely, I was born approximately 5 minutes before the Kyuubi's rampage began. Sakura took on a panicked expression, remembering how her parents warned her to stay away from Naruto. You're the Kyuubi. Sakura's shriek was met with a frustrated sigh by both Junin and all the other genin. No, Sakura. I am not the Kyuubi. It was sealed inside me, like rations into a scroll or anything else that is sealed. Sakura's breath calmed as she got over the shock and looked at the situation logically. The Yondaime was famous for being the greatest sealmaster alive at the time, and he had performed the sealing at cost of his life. Naruto had never displayed destructive or aggressive tendencies besides at the bridge, which was a combat situation. Neither of her parents were skilled with seals, her mother a civilian and her father a retired chunin. The odd cloak of red energy he had used was shaped like a fox, but it seemed to flow from his core. Her usually intelligent brain figured that Naruto was being honest, he was not the Kyuubi. As she calmed down, the others thought about what they had just learned. Shino had expected that for some time, though he only had situational evidence. Hinata just felt her admiration for Naruto increase. Sasuke felt that the Kyuubi was the only reason Naruto was so strong, and that Sasuke would be stronger if he had its power. Kiba didn't really have an opinion. Naruto was Naruto, and this didn't really change anything about him. The two Junin had already known, and thus had already formed opinions about our young hero. Hinata was the first to speak, easily the more talkative of Naruto's teammates. Is that why the villagers treat you like they do? They jump to the conclusion that you are the Kyuubi like Sakura-san just did. Sakura looked down in shame at having voiced that thought before considering all of the facts, determined not to be so judgmental from now on. Yeah, of course, I don't blame them too much. They lost their families and livelihoods, a lot of them. They don't bother to think that I lost my parents too. I'd probably have been a complete moron if Guy hadn't adopted me. Sasuke's envy dissipated as he heard that Naruto was mistreated because of his power. He wanted to kill Itachi, but there was no point if he was hated for the rest of his life afterwards. Gaining power was important, but Sasuke believed it important to be recognized. He did care for his teammates, even if he didn't show it. Kiba had essentially become his best friend, which was important even if he was his only real friend. Kakashi gave another of his physically improbable smiles, and looked at his students proud that they had realized the truth. He wasn't going to tell Naruto that his birth father was his sensei, but he still felt a connection to him. He had no idea that Naruto already knew, or he would have offered him a lot more than just the few scrolls he had given him. Naruto, however, already knew that Kakashi was his biological father's student, and planned to discuss it in private when he asked about using his sword. Tazuna and his family had been silent for the story, and none of them felt any animosity for the hero of their country. They hadn't lost anything in the Kyuubi attack, and Naruto had saved them from being overwhelmed by Gato's thugs. They didn't really understand too much about what he was talking about, but it seemed that he was the same as before and he didn't look like a fox, so he wasn't one. Naruto was glad that as soon as Sakura's misunderstanding had cleared, everyone accepted him. "Oh, Kakashi-sensei, I want to ask you about something." Kakashi looked at Naruto as the conversation veered to easier subjects, his lazy gaze hiding his impressive mind. "I'm going to keep the Nuibari, and I was hoping you could help me a little with some advice or something so I can get started training with it." Kakashi was thrilled to have another opportunity to help his sensei's son, and agreed to meet Naruto outside in an hour. Kurenai objected, saying that Naruto should rest more, but Naruto stated that he was fine and 2 days was more than enough sleep. When the two of them got outside, Naruto brought up something that he felt Kakashi should know. "Kakashi-sensei, I know who my biological parents are, and I know my dad was your sensei." Kakashi was shocked. When had Naruto found out? If the Hokage knew, why didn't he tell him? These questions burned through his mind before coming up with his own answer. The physical resemblance to the Yondaime would become more prominent if Naruto was seen around known acquaintances of him. That included both Kakashi and Jiraiya. If Kakashi's guess was right, Naruto's knowledge was kept from them for the same reason he hadn't been able to help Naruto in the open by adopting him. "How did you find out, Naruto?" It was supposed to be an S-rank secret. Naruto grinned and gave a "nice guy" pose, bringing a subconscious twitch from Kakashi. "One of my classmates told me I looked a lot like him, and I bothered Gigi until he told me when I asked for a paternity test. I could swear he was glaring at Dad though when I said, paternity." Kakashi's sweat dropped. He knew that Naruto would never have learned what that word meant without either engaging in the activity to cause it or Guy telling him. It was probably a good thing that Guy had though. Now Naruto had some of his mother's things at least. He would have to make Chunin to gain his father's, but Naruto would most likely do that on his first try. "Well, Naruto, if you already know, then I guess I can tell you about him while I show you the basics." 3 hours later, a winded Naruto and Kakashi came back to the house. Naruto's stamina wasn't completely recovered yet, and Kakashi had neglected his training since leaving Anbu enough that he was tired as well. His injuries and fatigue from the bridge played a large part in his exhaustion though. Naruto was smiling brightly though, glad to have learned a little about his first father. To Naruto's surprise, an extra person was in the dining room from when he had left. The kunoichi that had helped Zabuza was being convinced by Hinata that she should join them and come to Konoha. Wild promises about her being treated practically like she was royalty for having a keke genkai and about the world's most delicious cinnamon buns being used as evidence. Hinata even promised that she could still be a kunoichi if she wanted and that she would be her bestest friend if she agreed to come. Haku eventually relented, more interested in Hinata's promise to help her think for herself and be her friend than the cinnamon buns. Naruto briefly wondered why, until the rest of the team gave him Haku's backstory that Hinata had apparently pulled from the quiet girl while he was out. She had come from Kiri, where keke genkai were purged as being evil, and had been taken in by Zabuza because he gave her a purpose. Her father had killed her mother, then attempted the same on her. Ice spears rose from the ground and saved her, but she had lost her will to live. Naruto promised he would ask the Hokage to take her in himself, as he had a special relationship with the man. Both Hinata and Haku had thanked him for his support, Haku overwhelmed by the kindness these people that she had fought against showed her. Naruto shrugged off their thanks and returned to bed, too tired from straining his recovery to stay up the rest of the night with his fellow genin. Kurenai had already gone to bed, no longer keeping herself awake with worry and not having to watch over Naruto now that he was awake. A smile was on Naruto's face when he fell asleep, one destined to be wiped off as his dreams were the only place those he had killed were still alive. 11 quintillion 111 quadrillion 111 trillion 111 billion 111 million 111,111. A week later, both Team 7 and Team 8 along with Haku were gathered at the completed bridge, readying to return home. Inari was crying, and Naruto seemed to only just be holding back his own tears. His efforts proved in vain when Tazuna announced the name of the bridge, however. Thank you from the bottoms of our hearts, we would like you to take this letter guaranteeing cheaper trade rates to the Hokage, and welcome you all back anytime you wish. It is all thanks to you, that the great Naruto bridge is complete. Naruto's tears finally managed to break free when the name was announced, the gratitude and appreciation from these people more than he was ready for. Everyone smiled at Naruto as he bowed his head in respect to the people of Wave, where he was first labeled a hero. After a quick promise to return one day, the assembled ninja and their new friend turned and left, cheers following them for the first few minutes of their journey. The return trip was not at the breakneck pace they had used to reach Wave, but was faster than Kakashi's pace had been when his team had made the original journey with Tazuna. Naruto spent what spare time they had practicing with the Nuibari under Kakashi's advisement, and refusing to teach Sasuke the jutsu he had used to defeat all the thugs. Sasuke was upset until Naruto explained that he simply had yet to gain enough chakra to use the technique, as it took twice as much to form as a regular Suidan, Suiryuden no Jutsu Water Dragon Bullet, and its cost increased the longer it was active. Hinata spent most of her time convincing Haku to open up to her, and telling her about everything she was legally able in Konoha. Shino looked around at the bugs mildly, but didn't see anything he was unfamiliar with. Sasuke got Kakashi to give him a couple jutsu scrolls, for Raiden techniques as his team had their affinities tested by Kakashi back in Wave. Sakura practiced repeating her hand seals for genjutsu as fast as she could, speeding up whenever she felt comfortable. Kiba just worked on the exercise Kakashi gave him, channeling Doden chakra into a rock to make it bigger. When the gates of Konoha appeared, the team was definitely ready to go home. They knew that they would have a lot of work and explaining to do when they met the Hokage, but for now, they just let the sight of their home, hopeful home, in Haku's case, wash over them. Naruto smiled, excited to start training with his sensei's friend, and eager for whatever would come next. So, Kakashi, you decided to wait to signal back up until after you fought Zabuza, rather than when you were far closer and had just beat the demon brothers. If demoting you back to Genin and making it illegal for you to own Ika were options for punishment, I would use them. After I let you have a friendly spar with Enma and I. The Sandaime kept up the same kind look he usually had, but his promises of cruel and unusual punishment were all the more disturbing because of it. Kakashi was quaking in fear at the thought of no smut to read, but the idea of sparring with the Sandaime and Enma was ludicrous. Kakashi was good, but without the Sharingan he was an underpowered version of his father, and even the White Fang would never have been able to beat Sarutobi Hiruzen in a straight match. Hell, he doubted that his father and the three Sannin all together would have been able to beat the man in his prime. Sarutobi was just that good. Now, I also have been told by Kurenai that you neglected to teach anyone but the Uchiha on your team any practical skills. Tell me, is training one arrogant child to be minimally useful for solo missions and leaving your two other students to die a good example of the teamwork you so defend? Kakashi winced from the low blow. He had been planning to teach at least Sakura something, but she had never even once asked him. The whole reason he did AC rank was to show his team the dangerous life Shinobi led, but the danger of this particular mission was too high. Be grateful that the acquisition of the Nuibari and a prospective new Kekkei Genkei in the village will make the elders happy enough to leave me alone for a few weeks, otherwise my bad mood would be taken out on you. You aren't getting paid for your next 6 months of missions as my lenient punishment. Kakashi held back a sigh. A new Ica Ica was due out in 2 months, and the exorbitant cost of buying signed first editions meant he would either buy it and skip a few meals, or have to settle for a regular copy. His stomach would hate him for this. I understand and accept your mercy, Hokage-sama. Now, if there is nothing further, the Sandaime shook his head, signifying that Kakashi would stay while he talked to the combined teams, Kurenai having sent a basic report ahead. Bring the rest in. A shadow appeared at the Hokage's door and let the remainder of Team 7, as well as Team 8 and Haku inside. The assembled group inclined their heads in respect to the old warrior, before he began speaking once more. You all have accomplished much in this mission, securing a favorable trade agreement with Wave and acquiring the Nuibari marks far more than an average pay for an A-ranked mission. Naruto, you are free to keep the blade as your own, in lieu of bounty on Kushimaru. Naruto nodded his head gratefully, not willing to speak until the Hokage was finished. Now then, Yuki Haku, I believe. The slender girl gave a quiet affirmative, before the Hokage continued. The advance report stated that Zabuza had raised and trained you for several years until now, and that with his death you have come to Konoha to seek new purpose in life. All I need to know is, do you bear any grievance toward Junin Hatake Kakashi for his role in your mentor's demise? Haku went to respond and hesitated. Did she have anything against Kakashi? She knew it was just a conflict of interest that led to what happened, and that Kakashi was the one to bury Zabuza and leave the Kubikiribocho with him even though he had the right to take as the victor of their fight, but she had been very depressed with her master's death before Hinata had worked to try and bring her some measure of contentment. She took a few deep breaths before replying. No, Hokage-sama. Hatake-san is not the one responsible for Zabuza-sama's death. That traitorous pig that Zabuza-sama ended like the Cretan he was is the only one I can blame. Hiruzen nodded, having suspected as much since the girl was in better shape energy and injury-wise than anyone on the team save Naruto, who had been unconscious when she first woke up. She would have been able to kill the tired Kakashi before dying, if she had really blamed him for her master's end. Very well. You will be tested in both knowledge and skill by one of my Tokubetsu Junin to decide your place among my ranks. There will be a month-long trial period, and you will not be eligible for missions in the Land of Water due to the danger for yourself and any teammates if you were. Testing will commence in 2 days at Training Ground 15. Someone will show you where that is. Hinata's hand practically blurred into the air as she responded. I'll do it. If that is all right with you, Hokage-sama. A bright embarrassed flush was on Hinata's face for the first time since Naruto and Kurenai had helped her build her confidence. Haku lightly giggled at the look on the slightly younger girl's face, but stopped quickly remembering that the Hokage was in the room. The old man gave his trademarked, friendly grandfather smile and nodded, glad that a prospective new ninja was already creating bonds. Very well. Unless there is something not touched upon in the report, you are all free to leave. Everyone present bowed once more, before leaving. Hinata guiding Haku to the temporary living area to await her pending test. Naruto went to meet his father, ready to tell him about his successful defeat of the old swordsman and his use of the Hachiman. Everyone else returned to their own homes, most of them planning to tell their families or friends about the mission, Sasuke just to continue his Raiden training. As Naruto neared his home, he heard the louder than usual shouts of youth, that meant that Lee was training his youthfulness under Guy's directions. When Naruto finally saw the two of them though, he froze in absolute horror. Lee had transformed from the long-haired karate gi wearing boy he had met a year ago into a clone of Naruto's adoptive father, and no matter how much Naruto cared for his father, that wasn't an aesthetically pleasing event. Lee had always had parasitic caterpillar eyebrows like Guy's, but they seemed to grow in response to spending so much time near their superior. Naruto was certain now that the eyebrow caterpillar really did rob one of fashion sense if left unchecked, as Lee had adopted his father's terrible green spandex and orange leg warmers. There was an addition of bandages around his forearms and hands, signifying his use of the Omid Renge. Unfortunately, Naruto's shock at witnessing the youthification of Lee being complete was enough to let the two matching taijutsu specialists notice him. They ran toward Naruto and gave him a massive hug of youth, complete with a beautiful ocean sunset and palm trees. Even their caterpillars twitched in glee upon seeing the youthful without being too extreme about it Naruto. Naruto was further stunned when he realized that the strange organisms even opened their eyes and winked at him. My son, it is a most youthful day to see you return from battle. Guy's enthusiastic shouts were soon followed by Lee's, who had come to look at Naruto and Gaia's family in the last year. Naruto-kun, I heard you took AC rank and then when you got back you left again. Tell us of your youthful adventures. Naruto just gazed at the strange genjutsu surrounding him, knowing that he couldn't dispel it. If he and his father shared a youthful embrace without Lee, the scenery was instead a waterfall with leaves blowing in an imaginary wind around them. Guy and Lee set Naruto down, and waited for him to recover from his youth-induced stupor. When he regained complete awareness, he related the story of his defeat of a former seven swordsman and his becoming hailed as the hero of Wave. He also confessed to having needed both the help of Kurenai and the Hachiman to beat Kushimaru, and his use of the Kyuubi to defeat the thugs that remained. He even looked down in shame as he explained that he had used a kinjutsu from the Forbidden Scroll to kill all of the thugs. Guy sighed at the end of the story, one of his brief flashes of intelligence burning clearly into view. I knew that you would most likely need to kill someone one day, but I had hoped you would be older and more experienced first. Just remember, son, you did a noble thing and saved a small country from tyranny, with the help of your friends. Those thugs killed and stole and possibly worse before you finished them, and they were never going to change. Naruto nodded. He had already accepted his actions, but his father's statements eased a weight off of his shoulders. Lee looked a bit pale, his team never having killed in spite of their year of experience. The only one on his team that he thought would kill without much trouble was Neji, who was fatalistic and quite possibly homicidal. A great eternal rival though. I think that your idea to keep the Nuibari was excellent, it will increase your versatility, and thanks to your Kage Bunshin and your dedicated training, none of your other abilities will suffer. Naruto smiled. Guy had always been supportive of his idea to master many arts instead of specializing as he had. While a specialist was incredible in their field, it was a very limiting decision to pursue one discipline to the exclusion of all else. It worked best for fuinjutsu and medical ninjutsu, as specialists in these arts often were not sent into combat. Taijutsu specialists were disadvantaged by many other specialists, but they had advantages of their own. Ninjutsu and genjutsu specialists outranged them significantly, as did those who focused on throwing weapons and kusarigamejutsu. Kenjutsu users and bojutsu users didn't have quite as much of an advantage, but they still had the edge in reach. Taijutsu specialists didn't need the chakra levels or control that those who relied on the other main disciplines did, and they weren't dependent on some tool like a weapon specialist. Specializing in weapons and running out due to unforeseen difficulty or running out of chakra weren't among the top concerns of the taijutsu master, the only concerns they had were building strength for striking power and speed for defense. Naruto had chosen the most difficult possible path, becoming a master of every shinobi art. Only medical techniques were beyond his reach, as the Kyuubi's toxic chakra would damage anyone but him more than it would heal them, and he would need to master its powers to keep them from bleeding into his own techniques. Of course, no one could claim to have mastered every facet, not even the Sandaime Hokage, who reputedly knew every single technique attributed to Konoha shinobi. There was even an old story which claimed that, while incapable of utilizing the correct energies for the technique, he knew the mechanics for the Nadaime's original ninjutsu version of the Hiraishin. Changing one's chakra nature to set anchors with pure power and instantaneously transporting to them was essentially impossible, or would have been if the Nadaim hadn't been able to naturally activate time-space manipulation. In short, the Yondaimi's Hiraishin was better because it was less chakra-intensive and didn't require a unique change in chakra nature. The seal he used had taken care of the nature change for him, while the location of the kunai with the seals were his anchors, but rather than being forced into existence with high-density power, they were linked via the finesse of the calligraphy used to create them. The seal formulae he put down through touch was a modified version of the Nadaim's original, the formula changed from Senju Tobarama's first creation. That was what the Sandaime had told Naruto, anyway. He remembered then that he was with Lee and his father, and awkwardly scratched his head as he looked back at them. You look tired, son. The only ways to cure exhaustion are youthful training binges and sleep. Join Lee and I in practice, and I will teach you how to activate the Cumin. The Chunin exams are coming next month after all. Naruto's attention returned fully to his father. He was ready for more training. 11 quintillion 111 quadrillion 111 trillion 111 billion 111 million 111,111. Yugao, I wanted to ask you for a favor. Kurenai was in her living room speaking with a woman with long purple hair. Her upper arm bore an Anbu tattoo and her body was possibly a match to Kurenai's. She wore the standard uniform of the Black Ops division she worked for, with a longer than average sword for a shinobi. Her height at her side, it would get in the way on her back while she was sitting. The Anbu captain looked interestedly at her friend, one of the few serious kunoichi around her age. Well, you aren't one to ask for favors, Kurenai. Not like Anko, she barely goes a week without asking me to request she be the interrogator for a captive. She was serious. Kurenai hadn't asked her for any favors in the number of years the two had known one another. Whatever she wanted must have been important. My student, Naruto, killed Kuriare Kushimaru and has claimed the Nuibari. I can't teach him Kenjutsu though, and was hoping you might be able to spare a few lessons for him. Yugao had not been expecting to hear that a 12-year-old had killed a member of the Seven Swordsmen, nor that Konoha's Jinchuriki was the wielder of one of their legendary blades. She recovered from her shock with an amused, almost coy glance. Isn't Naruto the name of that jailbait boyfriend of yours? The surprised blush on Kurenai's face had the young captain laughing so hard little tears appeared in the corners of her eyes. He is my student Yugao. I am not engaged in that type of relationship. Who would even tell you something like that? The slight stutter marring Kurenai's first sentence just redoubled Yugao's laughter. Even though tomorrow she would be completely stoic and back on duty, she got to just be a woman speaking with an old friend today. Kurenai managed to fight her blush back off her face, still stunned that Yugao would think her capable of having an affair with a 12-year-old. If anyone shouldn't speak about that type of thing, it's her. I never dated any of my senseis before. Of course, Kurenai had never dated anyone before. She had been far too focused on her career, genjutsu mastery being a slow road to promotion in most circumstances. She had only made Junin a few months before she had gained her team. Yugao finally managed to answer Kurenai's query when she regained her breath. Anko did, of course. You should know that she is the only person we both talk to. Kurenai faintly remembered accidentally referring to Naruto as cute when drinking with Anko once, which had led to her moving from being a light social drinker to a teetotaler. The next day she had been woken up by Anko in a henge looking like a shirtless Naruto. Easily the most awkward morning of her life. Yugao had managed to consider the idea while laughing, and since Hayate was busy for a while, she supposed she didn't have anything better to do during her day off. Some Anbu used to receive 2 days off a week, before the Uchiha military police had been destroyed. It was only due to her shining record and meteoric rise through the ranks that she had one every week, rather than the standard every other week. Alright, I guess I can help your boy toy out a little, but he will need to fight differently with that sword than I do with mine. It favors thrusts and can be used at range because of its wire. Kurenai left her indignant thoughts behind when Yugao agreed. She only hoped Naruto would be able to learn to effectively wield the sword quickly. She planned to enter her team in the Chunin exams. First, she would have to catch up with her other students' training. They had never stayed behind to ask her questions or receive more training like Naruto had. 111 nonillion 111 octillion 111 septillion 111 sextillion 111 quintillion 111 quadrillion 111 trillion 111 billion 111 million 111,111. A woman with pupilless honey eyes and purple spiked hair walked up the steps to the Hokage's office. Her short skirt and fishnet top turned heads, though when people saw who they were looking at most quickly turned away. Mitarashi Anko was playing with some kunai in the pocket of her large trench coat, wondering what she was being called up for today. Last time had been because a wealthy and influential merchant had accused her of mentally scarring his daughter, who had espoused wanting to leave the family business and be a kunoichi after seeing the beautiful T&I member. The sandaime had called her in, told her what happened, and then waited for her to finish laughing. The merchant had been practically frothing at the mouth in anger, but the Anko merely said TP have told the girl her job when she'd been asked. It wasn't every day someone wanted to speak civilly with her. The sandaime just told the man that his daughter could be a kunoichi if she wanted to, and proceeded to dismiss him from the room and ignore him as he shouted on his way out. Too bad she couldn't remember the girl's name. She had apparently become a kunoichi and had been the best in her year. Maybe she should ask Kurenai when she got back from her trip to Wave. The presence of the Hokage's office door brought Anko from her thoughts, the soft command to enter carrying through. The sandaime usually wasn't waiting so eagerly for visitors that he actually used his skills to detect incoming shinobi. He had too much paperwork for that. When Anko opened the door, the old man wasn't even frowning, which might have been the first time he wasn't when she was called in. Maybe Danzo had stopped resisting her attempts to gain promotion or something. Sit down, Anko-chan. Hiruzen's ability to make people like him had only increased as he aged, his wise eyes and kind smile typically making anyone he talked to think of family. Anko, however, was immune. What did you need, Hokage-sama? You are in too good a mood for me to be the subject of a lawsuit again. His smile only widened. He loved bantering with some of his ninja. He had enjoyed bantering with Kakashi at first, but his excuses for being late just got worse as he aged. Ah, yes, Tenten-chan's father was very unhappy she decided to be a kunoichi. Her obsession with Tsunade-chan and you strikes me as more odd than an adventurous spirit though. Anko sighed. She was on her way to get some dango when an Anbu had told her to come to the office. I didn't call you here to wax nostalgic about old bouts with paperwork though. A new kunoichi prospect with the Hyoten Kekkei Genkei needs to be tested for rank in 2 days. The venue is Training Ground 15. You will test her. Anko didn't even think that the Hyoten was even still around. Where was she found? Kurenai's team brought her back from Wave. She had been serving Momochi Zabuza. Anko assumed she had been either poisoned or surprised to be taken down, or that Kurenai had done it since Kakashi outclassed her Ravenet friend. Obviously he would take Zabuza, but she would get the story from Kurenai when she visited her later, curiosity temporarily overpowering hunger for dango. Is testing her my only goal? Yes, although if she is where I believe her to be, I was hoping you would teach her. You are the best kunoichi in the village to teach ninjutsu, and most Kekkei Genkei clans have high chakra pools. Anko frowned at the idea of teaching. Her own sensei had permanently made her wary of the idea, mostly because she didn't want to teach anyone that pale-faced pedo bastard's techniques. Even if they were really good. I will consider it after I meet her and test her. If you think I'm best to teach her, I'll at least give it a thought. A smile was the response she got as she left to visit her best friend. 1 sextillion 111 quintillion 111 quadrillion 111 trillion 111 billion 111 million 111,111. So Haku, what do you think of Konoha? The Ice Maiden turned to look at her companion. Hinata had barely left her side since she had woke up back in Wave. She had also done everything she could both to ease Haku's pain from losing Zabuza and to convince her to join Konoha. Without the slightly younger girl's help, she probably would have just finished herself. Haku noticed that Hinata seemed almost desperate for approval, most likely hoping that Haku was satisfied that she had followed Hinata's advice in coming to Konoha. Many people turned to glance at the two preteens from both genders, jealous of not being with either of them. Haku had chosen to wear her favorite pink kimono and her thin choker when they entered the village. Her long dark hair, soft brown eyes, and slim, athletic body led many to blush when they saw her, both male and female. While Haku's features were clearly feminine, as was her voice, it seemed that even people here in Konoha would be unable to tell her gender. Haku was nervous though. She was unused to all the eyes on her and she was being seen with a Hyuga. Everyone knew that since the fall of the Senju and Uchiha, the Hyuga were practically royalty in Konoha. It seems just as nice as you promised, though I don't know how long it will take for me to get used to so many eyes on me. Hinata smiled brightly. She had spent much time with Haku in the past week, and was glad she liked her new home. Once the battle at the bridge had ended, Hinata found herself remembering the odd feelings that stirred when she watched Haku. She hoped to at least be friends with the last Yuki, even if her new friend wasn't attracted to her. Hinata had decided that the best way to understand what she thought about Haku would be to ask Kurenai and remain in Haku's presence as much as possible. Her own sensei had stirred something similar, though that had just been a form of admiration. Kurenai was beautiful, and Hinata wanted to be. Naruto had caused that same feeling. He was strong and never gave up or went back on his word, and she took strength from his example. Haku, on the other hand, caused her cheeks to heat and her stomach to feel strange. Maybe it was just because she had used her Byakugan to see what her gender was under her clothes, which had been her dark, loose-fitting battle clothes. Being the first non-relative she had seen naked might be the cause of her embarrassment. So she stayed, and tried to see if it lessened over time. It hadn't, and when she had asked Kurenai, she had only responded by saying, "I've never had any experience with what you're asking, but it sounds the same as how a friend describes her feeling for her fiancé." That had been the last nail in the coffin of Hinata's previous assumptions towards her sexuality. She just hoped that she would prove strong enough that her father wouldn't care. Artificial insemination existed. Many of the donors were powerful ninja hoping to spread their legacy that had no clans. Jiraiya of the Sanin had once donated twice a week. "I'm glad, Haku. Come on, I'll show you where to get the best cinnamon buns in the whole world." Haku giggled as Hinata's excited side came forth as she spoke of her obsession. "You know, I would like if you called me Haku-chan. We are friends now, right? I've never really had a friend before, so I don't know exactly." Hinata turned and stared at Haku for a few moments, before she responded. "We are definitely friends, Haku-chan." A remnant of Hinata's shyness showed through as she blushed a little using the affectionate honorific. Both of them smiled, before Haku allowed herself to be pulled forward. Every group having similar thoughts, wondering just what the future would bring.